All right, guys. So now that we have a good idea of the makeup of the nervous system, being the central and peripheral nervous system, let's talk more specifically about the functions of the nervous system. So we covered this a bit when we were talking about our, walking in the woods example, where we have some sort of sensory input, right? So this is us gathering specific types of information from our senses, right? So being able to do this allows us to monitor changes occurring both inside our bodies and also outside our bodies, right? We have to have a way to integrate that information or process that information, right? And so in so doing, right, we process and interpret this sensory input that we receive, and then our brain decides if a specific action is actually needed. If our brain does decide that an action is needed, then we have some sort of motor output, a outward response to that sensory input. And our response activates specific types of muscles or glands or organs, whatever the case may be. So we talked a bit about the cells of the nervous system. We talked specifically about neurons, but I do want to introduce another cell type. So neurons are the main cells of the nervous system that transmit messages throughout the body. But another that I want us to be familiar with is called neuroglia. And these are other cells of the nervous system, and they primarily function to provide support to the neurons. Now here is the structure of a neuron. And you're going to have to actually label this in the notes. And so here are the labels for you. And importantly, you will have to label this on a particular quiz. So keep this in mind as we walk through this example. So first, this main body here is what's called the cell body of the neuron. This contains the nucleus and other cell organelles that we're familiar with from our high school biology classes. Second, these offshoots here from the cell body are called dendrites. These are short branched extensions of the cell body, and they primarily function to receive stimuli. So receive sensory information coming in. The axon is this long, thin extension of the cell body itself. And this primarily functions to send nerve impulses away from the cell body. So this is sensory information going out from the cell body to the axon terminals. And I like to remember this axon starts with an A, and I remember that it transports neuron signals away from the cell body. And then finally, the myelin sheath here, which basically functions to insulate our axon here, which functions to increase the speed of those nerve impulses that are traveling across those neurons. So there are different types of neurons in our nervous system. First are sensory neurons. And so these are specific nerve cells that are in our nose, ears, and eyes that we can use to send impulses from sense organs, like those that I just mentioned, to the spinal cord and brain. Two are called interneurons, inter meaning between. So these primarily function as the middleman between our sensory organs or our sensory neurons and motor neurons. And so they relay messages between these two specific types of neurons. And motor neurons, right, cause specific types of motion. And so they send impulse from the brain and spinal cord once it's been processed to effectors, either muscles that we want to move or glands that need to, secrete any type of substance in response to that stimuli. And so basically we have kind of this loop here where we have some sort of sensory receptor in the form of a sensory neuron in, say, our eye, and we see some sort of incoming stimulus, right? So we have sensory input. That then gets sent to the brain. Remember, those interneurons are kind of in between, kind of relaying messages from the sensory to the motor neurons. We think about it in the brain, and that produces some sort of motor output response. And so let's say we want to move our lower leg. Well, then we say, okay, contract that muscle and move that leg. And so now that we have a good idea of what goes on in the nervous system, let's talk more about specifically sending a message through a neuron. And we're going to get more into this in the next section.